Hey guys, Rob here from Room 301. Today I'm joined by Bet Hannon from the US of A. Bet is the CEO of AccessiCart, a really great company out of America focused on making sites more accessible. Now, Bet brings some really good insights today on why anybody running a website, growing a website, should consider making their website more accessible and not just to tick boxes. This actually has a real commercial impact on things like revenue, conversion rates, and all the good stuff like that we really care about. So sit back, enjoy, and let's get into it. Bet, hello, and thank you for being on. Bet, why is it so important for e-commerce websites to be accessible?
Yeah, so I I think there are three reasons why you should make your website accessible, why your e-commerce site should be accessible. One is that if you're not accessible, you're losing money. Globally, people with disabilities represent about $8 trillion in disposable income. And when you extend that to their friends and families, it's 13 trillion. If you're not accessible, you're missing out on some of that spending. Um, Two, it's the law increasingly in a lot of places. So the EU, we can talk more about the European Accessibility Act. And that's if you sell to Europeans, it's not where your business is based, like GDPR. There's laws in the United States, there's laws in the UK, then Canada, other places all around the world. So it's the law. Um, and three, there's an aspect of karma about this, right? If you're lucky enough to not die suddenly, you'll probably develop a disability. And so it's kind of about what you want for your future self or what you want for your parents or your spouse or your kids if they develop a disability. Do you want people to be able to do this and create a place where people can interact and have human dignity and independence. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
So tell me more
yeah.
about the legal side of it. So obviously, a lot of our listeners are based in the UK. So how much do you know about the laws around it in the UK and what might be to come over the next maybe 12 months or so?
Yeah, so while in some other places, well, that EU law is really new, in the UK, the laws around accessibility come from like around 2010 and a little bit later. So they're kind of early a little bit, but yeah, there are laws on the books in the UK about making sure that your website is accessible. Now, there are stricter standards almost everywhere for government sites, right, as opposed to private business. But increasingly, private business is being held to account for those kinds of things in the UK. And we all over the world, there's the way that the technical pieces for understanding web accessibility is called the Website Content Accessibility Guidelines. We sometimes say WCAG, WCAG. We're now on version 2.1, 2.2, but all over the world, people look at 2.1 and double A. There's three levels: single A, double A, triple A. Each one up includes everything at the bottom, but the middle level is where all the legal standards are. And so it's kind of like, I think sometimes people get a little discombobulated thinking, oh, there are these things all over the world I have to pay attention to. And it's really just looking at those guidelines and kind of working to make your site conform to those guidelines. And that'll cover you most places.
Awesome. So I've got one more question actually before we jump on to
Yeah.
three key questions. And we didn't discuss this previously, so hopefully it doesn't catch you off guard.
Oh,
So put yourselves in the shoes of a marketing manager, marketing director, somebody who holds a marketing budget that's been given to them from a CEO or whoever it might be. What argument would you give for them spending money on making their website accessible when seemingly that is often put towards the bottom of the list, isn't it? So what's the
it's
case
deep.
for absolutely. So what's the case for doing it?
It often is deprioritized. And I think what I see when I'm looking at companies that are doing things versus not doing things is one that looking at the revenue piece is companies tend not to have enough resources, not just financial, but also people resources to deal with accessibility until they hit, and I'm sorry, this is going to be US terms, about $2 million US dollars, or translate that for your in in revenue, right? And it's that you have to get things off the ground. I mean, there's so many other things you have to get things off the ground, and you have to attend to get to that point. It's really when you kind of get to that level of maturity as a company that then you can start to really, that accessibility should come on the radar. Partly, the argument for doing it with the C-suite is going to be the that revenue building, right? So there are some studies out that show that you can 1.6x your revenue when you're making things accessible. So that's big, right? It can be a revenue boost. You can almost always when you're improving accessibility, you're improving SEO, right? Because you have to do semantic structure and you have to do alt text on your images, all those things. So it improves SEO. But also, it improves the user experience for all your users. We sometimes call that the curb cut effect, like, those little ramps on the sidewalk where people that were put in there for people with wheelchairs or scooters, right? But they help people on bikes or people with strollers or people pulling their luggage, right? That it helps everybody. So it can make a great user experience boost. It can also be a good way to build your brand. If anything about your brand is about being inclusive, right? Then this is just like a part of your brand, and you need to be thinking about that. And then it can also be a way to retain existing customers. So, like I said earlier, the chances that someone will develop a disability as they age are great. And it almost always costs less to keep your current customers than it is to acquire new ones. And so if you can keep those current customers as they are starting to develop disabilities, and some of that is not just, diagnosed disabilities, but things like as we age, it gets harder to see the small print, but also color perception changes as the lens of the eye starts to yellow, and so color contrast starts to be important. So if your demographic is people over 50, that's huge for trying to make sure you're having a good experience there for those folks. So for all those reasons, you would begin to think about doing that. But, it's kind of like, if you're at the beginning as a company, it's probably not going to be as high. Although I would argue that you should be paying some attention to that, right? There are some basics that everybody can learn that are not hard to implement, and
No.
yeah,
I thought it was a fantastic answer, actually. I love the way you spoke about, because C-suite, at the end of the day, they are going to care most about what will it return, what's the revenue return going to be. But actually, there's so many intangible benefits to making a website accessible, and some that I didn't even consider, like the SEO side of things, really important. It can add a lot of weight to it.
yeah.
Brand side, the retention. I think, yeah, you've made a really good case there to start thinking about accessibility for anybody listening who hasn't already gone through that journey. So,
Well, and I think let's talk about sometimes there. When I said there are some really simple things, there are some pretty, like we call them low hanging fruit. Like there's some relatively easy things, not necessarily super technical, that people can begin to do in house and begin to start building in house. So, for instance, even if you haven't been doing it previously and you have a backlog, right? Start making sure you're putting good alt text on your images, right? Start making sure that you're putting things in with a semantic heading structure down the page. You never skip from an H2 to an H4. But you're putting those pieces in there, that you're not putting in vague link text. So when you have a link, that the text that you make into a link, it should be people who are blind and use screen readers often have their screen reader just read out loud to them the link text. So and they're scanning for content just like we would scan visually, right? But if all it says is click here, click here, click here, it
I'd
tells
say
them
UV.
nothing, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so alt text, heading structure, link text, and color contrast, right? And those are not super hard. Maybe
No.
the color contrast a little, but there are these free checkers everywhere on the web. So just starting now even if you don't worry about the backlog of what you've created, but just stopping creating new inaccessible content can go a long way, right?
I was going to say the backlog is one thing, but actually most people, 99% of people listening to this can probably start doing everything you just mentioned then from tomorrow.
Yeah, and the key is to think about how you're going to put this into your systems so that you're kind of like remember it like it becomes habit, but it's also kind of a systems check, right? So
Right.
when and it's people who are designers that need to pay attention to this, and people who are content managers, as well as I think people often just think, oh, it's only a developer thing, right? So it is a developer thing at some levels, right? But those beginning things are really much more marketing and design people or
It's really
content and design.
interesting because when we start talking to a new client and we're looking at their website, often their brand palette is actually inaccessible. We'll also audit their brand palette, and you can't actually make their website accessible because the colors within their brand just don't work together. So we often have to deliver bad news around that, which is always quite interesting.
And yeah, it can be a real challenge, and that's what I think when we've tried to. Yeah, we'll talk a little later about what we do, but when we're trying to do some consulting for development, we try to do that in some throughout the project. So we'll work initially. We'll for instance talk with the developers about what are the features that are being planned and where might you find some gotchas that you want to pay attention to. Things like, it's really hard. Date pickers are always hard, for example. Like, well, they may not be aware of that. And so talking about that. But then design is the next one, right? Like get the mock-ups and the design assessed for accessibility before you get the client to approve them, because it's really hard to go back. And sometimes there's a saying in the accessibility community that if you don't put accessibility into the project from the beginning, then it's kind of like trying to bake a muffin and put the blueberries in later. That it's hard and it's expensive. It's the most expensive way to do accessibility is to tack it on at the end as kind of like something we'll just sort of do a little QA check on later.
100%. Well, look, let's move on to the three core questions. So the first question,
Oh
Beth,
yeah.
is called "What's in your toolbox?" Now, we're all busy. We're all running businesses of different shapes and sizes with different amounts of team members, etc. Now, what are the things you use to stay organized, to stay on top of your workload?
Yeah, so I have a number of productivity tools. I would say the one of the big ones for me is I use Dragon Dictation.
Oh, wow.
So when like 15 years ago, I had to have over the course of 2 years have thumb surgery repaired. So I was spent a lot of time in casts and braces, and typing was horrible. And so I learned to I kind of tried experimented with it a little bit. This is the early days of Siri, right? And so now I use Dragon Dictation on my desktop, and it is 3 times faster than typing for me. So I can dictate into everything. And people can start to do this a little bit on their mobile devices too, right? You use Google Voice or Siri to kind of like just dictate an email or what it's way fast. Now there's still errors. You have to kind of like correct for errors, and every once in a while something will be weirdly I won't catch something and it'll go through weirdly, but wow, that's been a game changer for me in terms of, I dictate into, our team uses Basecamp, and sometimes I'm having to leave a response, but I can dictate that all and move pretty quickly. So
Nice. That allows you to get through messages, emails, two times rate.
everything, yeah. And then I use Siri a lot on my phone too for that too. And so
And
even texts and stuff for
you mentioned you used Basecamp. Is that sort of product management, project
Mhm.
management for different projects and
Yeah.
team communication, etc.? How do you find that?
Pretty good. It works pretty well for what we need it to do. And we have some Zapier Zaps set up. So we use Freshdesk as a ticketing system for cl- uh, for clients. Although that's diminishing a little bit, but we have that Freshdesk, and so when a new Freshdesk ticket is created, it creates a new to do in Basecamp so that we can kind of manage the our side of the communication. Without the client seeing it, right? And then we can agree on who's going to reply to the client or how that's going to get taken care of. And yeah, so I like.
Awesome. I remember using Basecamp many years ago. I imagine the products have evolved a hell of a lot since then. So
They keep pushing out some new features. Like in the last couple of years, they put a Trello like board up.
Oh, nice.
It's still got a little bugs occasionally
Yeah,
here and there, but you know,
usually do.
it's that's been helpful. We have one team member who really likes the Trello. You know, really, we used to do stuff in Trello a lot, and that we moved to Basecamp, and that person missed Trello a lot, and so when the board came to Basecamp, they were excited.
Awesome. So next question. A big believer in, the more you fail, the more you learn. You were telling me a bit about your journey
Yeah.
from a web development agency to where you are now. I thought it was super interesting. I imagine in that journey there's been a lot of failures and times where you've gone wrong, but it's all led to where you are now. So what are some times you failed? And there is bonus points here if it's funny, but if it's not, it doesn't
Oh,
matter.
I don't have any funny ones. I have sad ones, but not funny ones.
Bad
I
one.
think, I think, you know, I don't know that it was a big kind of dramatic failure, but I think when I think about what I wish I had done differently, was understanding really the need to niche and be distinctive much earlier. I think for a long time, I worked really hard to sell us as this generic web development agency
Yeah.
out there with the thousands and thousands of other generic web development agencies. And
This is a good opportunity for you to just explain a little bit about where you came
yeah,
from and how the business evolved to where it is now, if that's okay.
yeah. So I had I'm older than I look. I had a first career in nonprofit management.
Okay.
And then I was doing techie geeky things at the last couple of places and that I worked. And in 2008, at the beginning of the financial crisis here in the States, that my position got downsized, and it was okay. Kids were I needed to be home with kids a little bit. That was fine too. But I kind of stumbled into freelancing. And it was like this light bulb. Like it had never occurred to me that you could do that fun techie, the things I really enjoyed, the techie geeky things, and people would pay you for it. I was like, wow. And so I then kind of stumbled into pulling it together as an agency pretty quickly after that. But we did general WordPress development for a long time. And out of my nonprofit connections, a lot of our first clients were nonprofits, but we kind of grew that over time. Um, and then realizing that whole experience of we had a client that needed accessibility.
Okay.
And they're actually still a client. They're a division of the government of the state of California, and they needed accessibility, and they wanted our team to be able to support them day to day in that. And so our team, they helped us get some training, and it was like this light bulb moment for our team, like, oh, we understand what this is, and it impacts people we know and love, and it just created this sense of purpose for us. And so over since that time, we've been like turning the aircraft carrier of where we're focused, but even then, I think I didn't like, oh, we'll do more with accessibility, but then it was like, okay, amorphously, and then realizing, oh, maybe like, so that was 10 years ago that we had the client that kind of helped us get going. And then just like 2 or 3 years ago, realizing, oh, most people who work in this space do government or higher education. But 80% of the lawsuits in the United States for web accessibility are e-commerce. Nobody's doing
Okay,
e-commerce
all right.
stuff. And so kind of beginning to focus there. And then even then after that, there's more like, oh, you don't think about you. I think, oh, okay, it'll be a limiting thing. You're worried about it because when you start to niche, you feel like, oh, I'm going to be turning down other
Yeah.
things, and you're like anxious. And then realizing, oh, there's like when you get to that place and you sort of look out further and you go, oh, there's even further niching that could be done. There's even, I could even think about other ways that this could be more focused, right, in terms of what we do. And so I think that's my mistake, is that I
How have
didn't understand how that niching worked, right?
how have you found that transition? Because admittedly, we've not been as focused or as narrowed as maybe we could be, and probably due to the same reasons you've just said there, but in terms of I suppose my fear of turning down the opportunity. So how have you found that
I
transition? Have you
I
found it?
think I think the thing that I didn't understand, Rob, was that when you there's how you position yourself
Yeah, yeah.
and and market yourself, what you say you do, and then there's what you're choosing to take on, right? Which is not necessarily public, right? And so when you say, I'm only going to do accessibility for like the marketing pieces, we focus on this, we focus on this. Well, the reality is you're still going to get inbound stuff for government or higher ed or whatever, and you have to kind of choose what's there, right? So if the pipeline isn't very full for e-commerce, maybe I'm still going to take on those things, even while I'm still positioning myself in marketing this way, right? And then at a certain point, you have to start making those choices and you have to start turning down that work, but it's not until you have more of a clear, full pathway. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah,
And I think that's true for a lot of folks when they're starting to niche, right? You say, we're going to work with this type of client. You don't turn down other, I mean, you guys still have to keep the lights on, right? You have to kind of like, so
it's,
you don't turn down other work until the pipeline is full enough of those kind of clients that you start saying no. But it's when you start saying no that then you really are kind of moving a little bit
it's
further down that path. Yeah, you know,
it's
so
working when you're saying no.
yeah.
Excellent. So the last part of the podcast is where we put something in marketing that we really don't like, really grinds our gears, really annoys us into Room 301. So, Bet, before we talk more about accessibility and your business, what is one thing about marketing, and I'm going to take a wild guess as to what it might be,
Mm.
one thing about marketing that really annoys you?
Oh, just people that put inaccessible crap out on the web.
Knew it.
Like, like, here's something I encountered in the last few months, right? So it's uh, a new startup that wants to do gender neutral clothing, which
Okay.
is kind of a really kind of cool concept, right? And so they're doing, yeah, and they're putting that out there, except that I don't know what they did to their Shopify site, but you can't keyboard to navigate. So people who are blind and people who are mobility can't use a mouse because they're mobility impaired. They have to depend on keyboard navigation. You can't get, you can get to the product page, but you can't ever select a variation. You can't ever tab into choosing a pattern, a fabric, or a pattern or color of the shirt. So you can never buy anything from their website. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. That's just sort of like a basic thing. And yeah, so that ticks me off. And what ticks me off about it is that that means for someone with a disability to buy that product, if they really want to buy that product, then they have to have a family member or friend come back later to help them get that purchase made. So the likelihood of actually getting that to happen because of all the other things that they have to do to get help from family is there. But if they do, it just represents one more time that their independence and kind of human dignity is assaulted, and that hurts my heart. So,
No, I imagine
yeah,
I imagine you see this day in day out, given what you
all
do
the
as
time,
well.
all
Yeah,
the time.
just
And
to
it's
take
I
on
don't
from
think people are being intentionally,
no,
just it's just like it, but it's kind of like, I think of accessibility as kind of like holding the door open for, like when you have a customer coming into your coffee shop with their arms full of packages, you want them to come in and buy their coffee, but you're going to open the door for them to get in because their arms are full, right? So it's kind of like open the door. Like, why would you build a shop and then keep people out?
no, absolutely. So, what just to follow on from that, what are the most, from what you see, what are the most common barriers people with disabilities face when using e-commerce websites?
Well, those four kind of things that we talked about before, the alt text, the link text, the heading structure, the color contrast, those are really basic issues that are happen all the time.
Mhm.
And they can be kind of impactful for folks. And it's important to understand that some of those things can be found with automated checking. So there are a few automated tools that can help you start to check for accessibility, but they only find about 30% of issues.
Okay.
And so one of the things that we see a lot that people don't catch a lot of times because it's not a part of these automated tools or the overlays. That's a whole new another conversation about why those are terrible. But those overlays can't fix keyboard navigation problems, right? So those have to be checked for manually, and you just have to kind of begin to look at that. So that would
Cool.
help.
And you just mentioned we've nearly gone a whole episode without mentioning this word, but you've just mentioned automation.
Oh,
How do
yes.
you feel with things
You were
like
trying to get away without mentioning automation.
yeah? So how do things like, or in your view, how do you think things like AI might impact accessibility? Where do you think it's going to go?
Yeah.
In the next couple of
So
years?
AI is already impacted. I mean, even before the last year, impacted accessibility. So when you see automated captions that, like, I assume when you upload this to YouTube, you're going to turn on the
Yeah,
captions and you're going to have those captions there, right?
that's
That's huge. And so those that automated captions means that you didn't have to pay a person to sit down and caption this type out the captions for this video. Now, the important thing is AI, like we have all been learning, is not always 100% right. And so when you turn on those captions, for instance, you're going to want to check through them because sometimes, especially when there's like any technical things but sometimes it can just be embarrassingly wrong, right? In terms of what it puts out there in terms of the caption. But AI is letting people do Zoom captions for meetings, and so people who have
right.
hearing issues can use those. I'll admit sometimes when I've had recently an issue a few weeks ago with my router here at home that was that meant that people were like the sound was dropping, right? And so now I'm turning on captions. So it's another example of how
Yeah.
these accessibility things impact us all. I turn on the captions, so I made sure I got everything even when their sound was glitchy. So uh, turning on those kinds of things. We do see there are some tools, for example, for AI generation of alt text.
Okay.
So if you think about a situation where there's an e-commerce site, they've got 5,000 products, and each of those products have 3 or 4 images, but none of them have alt text. That's going to be a huge job, right?
Yeah.
And so there are some tools to automatically generate the alt text. Now it's important to remember that again, the image recognition quality is not always great. We have this great image that I use sometimes in presentations of a dad playing with a toddler on the beach. I assume the dad. Anyway, a man playing with a toddler on the beach. But the AI generation was scary people in masks. And I'm like, that's not even close, right? And so, making sure that you're, going back, use the AI to draft those, but then come back. Do remember, though, that a lot of things for alt text, for example, the alt text is not just describing the image in a kind of sterile way, but
Yeah.
it's related to the context, right? So the alt text gives people the flavor. I mean, a lot of times we choose images for flavor, right? And so you want to use the alt text that kind of conveys that. Is it more educational in tone? Is it more emotional in tone, right? And then product alt text is its own special category because you're not just describing what's happening in the image, 4 friends sitting around a campfire. You're describing the product, the fleece vests that they're wearing, right? And so you're zeroing in on the product and its description, and then you need to think about, well, have you been relying on the image to convey things about this product that really should go in the product description?
Yeah.
So, like, does the vest fall at the waist or at the hips, right, or below the hip, right? Where, like, all of those things that we would visually see right away, maybe stuff needs to go into the product description and not necessarily in the alt text. But so there's a great, we had Meg Miller from our team wrote a great post on our website about product alt text as a kind of specialty. So,
Awesome. Well, look,
yeah.
but I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I know the team
Yeah.
here at the Digital Maze, we ran a webinar last year on accessibility. We wrote a really in-depth blog about it. I know it's a real hot topic here,
Yes.
particularly because it's, as you quite rightly said at the start of the episode, it's becoming compulsory rather than an option. So I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think this is something that would be really
Yeah.
useful for our listeners. So, but tell us more about your business and where
Yeah.
our listeners can find out more.
Yeah. So AccessiCart is set up to come alongside either in-house teams or agencies to provide that level of expertise, so subject matter experts. So we come in, we provide testing. So we're doing some automated testing because you want to leverage that when you can. We're providing, we have a team of people that we work with. There's a B Corp that's hired blind women to do testing. So we're be able to bring some user testing by people with disabilities, and that's important. And then our own in-house experts that are able to do additional testing. And then we're pulling all that data together, collating it, prioritizing it. That's important because you want to work on the most impactful issues first. Not only the most in terms of a barrier for people with disabilities, but the things that are more likely to get you sued, right? So we can help you prioritize those things, or sued or complaints, right, file. So we can help you prioritize those and then serve as kind of consultants for helping the in-house team or the agency fix those things and then validating the fix. In the U.S., as you know, it's all about people suing one another. And so those monthly report, we do some kind of monthly pieces, and those reports can begin to be a legal defense. We think that they'll probably be a legal defense in the UK too. And generally speaking, I think most of these enforcement agency, the people that are doing the enforcement, whether that's courts or wherever, what they really want to see is that you have some commitment.
Yeah.
Even if it's not big, they want to see that you have, good faith effort to trying to work on accessibility over time. So you want to figure out ways that if you're working on accessibility, that you're documenting that, right? Don't just sort of like do it and then occasionally or whatever, but you want to document it, even if you're doing it occasionally, right? It's not just documenting it all. So we're coming alongside to provide that, and we package that up in a couple different ways. We do some consulting for development projects. We do sometimes people will need to do a remediation project, not a redesign, but just fix the accessibility issues, and so we can help with that. And then, accessibility is something that it's kind of like SEO. It has to be maintained over time. Right? You have to, anytime the website changes, anytime new content is added, anytime things are changed, anytime even like plugins or software is updated, new accessibility issues can come into play. And so you want to be regularly checking on that. So we have an accessibility maintenance plan where we do that, and we do produce that monthly reporting that can be helpful. So, and yeah, I try to think about ways that we can partner, because I think about it as partnering to help guide people. So.
Amazing. Well, I think you're going to be very busy over the next few years as this becomes more and more of a hot topic. So, your website, by the way, is that the best place for people to
Yep.
go? What
Yep.
is the
Yep.
URL?
AccessiCart.com. Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, Bet, thank you so much for
Oh,
being on. I've loved hearing about your journey, and I think it's been a really insightful conversation. So, yeah, very grateful for you jumping on. It's actually 6 a.m. where Bet is as well. So, sip away at your coffee. So, yeah, very grateful for getting up so early and speaking with myself. So,
as we're working with more folks in the EU, I'm up early for these meetings all the time, so I'm a morning person. Not a bad, but
brilliant.
it's
Well,
been
thank you.
lovely to hang out with you, and yeah, love to keep in touch. So,
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll catch you again in 2 weeks' time, I believe. So, yeah, see you all again soon.